Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program question and answer session. I'm Simbri Ross, the Grants Program Manager with HCEMA, with Charles Madden, our Grants Bureau Chief. Today we're going to review how to submit your application for this $100,000 funding opportunity. Charles, if you would you tell us about the $90 million available nationwide?
The 2020 Nonprofit Security Grant Program is a DHS FEMA grant program intended to support nonprofit entities in major urban areas that are 501c3 nonprofit entities at risk of terrorist attack. In the urban area portion of this grant, which we're going to talk about today, there's $50 million available nationwide for nonprofits within each of the major urban areas in the country. It's a fully competitive grant, meaning that there's no pre-designated amount set aside for each urban area. Each application can be a maximum of $100,000. The District of Columbia Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency is the state administrating agent for the National Capital Region, or NCR. DC is the core city for the NCR, which also includes Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland, and Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax, Alexandria, and Arlington in Northern Virginia, as well as any other subdivision or political entity within that overall geographic footprint. If your organization is within that footprint, you will be submitting your application to DC HSEMA, and we'll go through the specific application requirements in this video.
The overall timeline is laid out on the screen. The announcement was pushed out by FEMA on February 14th. We have an internal deadline for submissions to our agency by the end of the day on March 27th. We then must review and score the applications and submit them to FEMA in one package on April 15th.
We expect FEMA's final selection of which entities will be funded sometime in early July. Then, sometime before September 30th, FEMA will issue DC a single award that includes the amounts for all of the entities in the National Capital Region that are going to be funded. The SAA will then be issuing subawards to each individual nonprofit that was successful. We will issue that subaward with a period of performance of 2 years initially, from September 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2022. There is a third year in the grant program for the entities that require it, but we're going to start off presuming that all projects can be finished within 2 years and reserve the third year for any extensions as needed on a case-by-case basis.
Application requirements consist of your submitting 3 documents to our office: the investment justification, a mission statement as a separate document where you indicate the purpose of your organization, as well as a risk and vulnerability assessment. All 3 documents are necessary for your application to be complete.
The investment justification consists of the following sections: applicant information, background, risk, which comprises threat, vulnerability, and consequence, as well as then target hardening activity, the milestones for your project, a description of project management, and the impact of your project. Now we're going to go through the investment justification itself. This is the Excel spreadsheet. This is the only portion of the application that is actually scored. What we'll be going through in this presentation is each section of the application, explaining what kind of information is needed in each section, reviewing scoring criteria for that section, and we'll also review how many points toward the overall score each section consists of. We'll also focus on how to make the template work correctly and how each question will be scored. What we're displaying now is the Excel template for the investment justification for 2020 and what it looks like when you first open it. The very first thing I would like to point out is that when you open this file, you'll most likely see some kind of warning or pop-up notice. A request will come up at the top asking to either enable editing or to make this a trusted document of some kind. This is to enable the functionality of the form. You'll have to click that button and enable the editing or enable the permissions in the form, because if you don't, then the form won't be editable and you won't be able to enter data. Before we start going through the investment justification, I'd also like to point out that at the bottom of the workbook, there are 2 worksheets in this Excel document. There's the investment justification, which is the template that you submit, but there's also an introduction sheet, and in here, there's written instructions on how to open and enable the functionality of the form. This is the same as what we just described a few seconds ago on how you need to open the form and enable the content. It also includes instructions on how to save the template. We'll cover this right now. FEMA does want this saved in a specific format. It needs to be saved as an Excel 97 to 2003 format. When you're saving the document, don't just click Save in the drop-down menu. Click Save As, and then select out of the options for the different file formats. You must select Excel 97 to 2003 format and make sure you're saving the file in that manner.
Getting back to the investment justification itself, the first section basically is information about your organization. In the very first block, you'll be indicating the legal name of your organization. Thereafter, you'll complete a block which indicates the physical address of your facility. Be sure to include the county where your facility is located, as well as the year of original facility construction. Also, do not give an approximation of how old your structure is, but the actual date of original construction. Thereafter, you'll indicate your organization's ideology, beliefs, and missions. You'll have 400 characters in which to state this. In the next space, you'll indicate the membership and community served by your organization. Regarding 501c3 tax-exempt status, you're not going to be asked to provide the number of your 501c3 tax exemption. In fact, you'll only need to answer yes or no to that question. The only number that you must indicate in the investment justification is your actual DUNS number. So your DUNS number needs to be complete. In terms of the Urban Area Security Initiative, you will select from a drop-down menu, National Capital Region, and you will also indicate your funding request. $100,000 is the maximum amount possible under the grant program. But if you're seeking less, you can write less than the amount as your funding request. You may also indicate the total project cost for the amount of your project, which may exceed or be less than your funding request. Again, where you are submitting several investment justifications for multiple sites, the combined total of the application cannot exceed the combined amount of $100,000. Also, please indicate whether you have any contracts with DHS. That does not mean whether you have had a previous grant or subaward, but whether you are under contract to perform any services in any capacity. The last area that you must complete on the first page of the investment justification is regarding the phase of the project, whether the phase for the project is new or ongoing. If you've never received a subaward in the past, then you will select new. If you have received several subawards in the past or grants in the past, then you will indicate ongoing as your investment phase.
Please make sure to use the drop-down selections where they are available. You may find that it's possible to write text in those fields, but the correct responses should be chosen from the drop-down menus. This covers the first page of the introductory information. This section of the application is not scored. It does need to be complete, but it is not counted toward the overall score of the investment. In the background section, describe your organization. Describe the symbolic value of the site. Describe what factors make it a significant possible target for terrorism, and describe any previous or existing role in responding to or recovering from terrorist attacks. This section is worth 2 points out of the possible 40. It's not a high scoring section, but it does need to be completed, and the easiest way to lose points is to not address both questions and fully address the questions that are being asked. Since this is the first scored section, I do want to go over the best practice for applicants, which is to read this question, but also refer to the scoring criteria and read what the scoring criteria are. The scoring criteria are available on the HCMA website as a separate document. We will be looking at the scoring criteria when we are reviewing your applications, so it's useful to look at not just the question, but also how the scoring criteria is applied to that question.
Just to make sure you have a full context when you're entering your information. In this section, the first part is to describe the symbolic value of the site as a highly recognized national or historic institution or significant institution within the community that renders the site a possible target of terrorism. And the second section is to describe any previous or existing role in responding to or recovering from terrorist attacks. We're going to look at, did you describe your nonprofit organization? Did you provide information about its symbolic value? Did you tell us about your role in response and recovery? Again, for 2 points.
In the next section, this is your risk section, and this is one of the most important sections of the application. It's worth 12 points out of a total score of 40. This is basically your explaining to us and to FEMA what your threats are, what your vulnerabilities to those threats are, and what the potential consequences of that threat is. DHS views risk in those 3 areas: threat, vulnerability, and consequence. So that's why it's broken up into 3 distinct sections with the maximum score of 4 for each section. First is threat. And this is, what is the threat posture that you see of the threats coming your direction? Who or what is out there that has a current interest or historic interest in attacking organizations of your type or kind? What similar attacks have occurred in this region or in this country or around the world? This is basically what you see as the things that are threatening to you. This is not the section where you would address your facility's vulnerabilities or weaknesses. That's in the next section. The biggest mistake we see applicants do in this area is to mix and match threat and vulnerability and capabilities to respond throughout all 3 questions. The important thing is to be disciplined in addressing threat in the threat section, addressing vulnerabilities only in the vulnerability section, and addressing consequence only in the consequence section. The easiest way to maximize your point gain is to be clear and concise in each section.
Again, regarding threat, it's worth a maximum of 4 points out of 40. We're going to be looking at how well did you address the findings from previously conducted risk assessments or police reports or insurance claim. And as Charles mentioned, this is the area that you can refer to matters that have been reported to the police, or if you are a synagogue similar to the Tree of Life synagogue and you think that there are parallels that make you at risk in terms of a threat, you can cite that or any international events, such as masks that are similar to those in New Zealand. So this is what would be emphasized in this section, threat.
As Sembri mentioned, the generic statement of threat, while it can be helpful, you may also find your application is strengthened with a more specific statement of why your organization is specifically under threats similar to others. If that is the case, you may have documentation or proof or a rationale for why this is the case, and this would be the place to say it, because that would be the section where the reader is looking for an explanation of why there's a threat to your organization. In the next section, vulnerability, this is where, once you've described what your threat is, now you get into describing why your facility is vulnerable to that kind of threat. And this is really about security gaps, the weaknesses that you see in your facility's security posture. You should discuss your organization's susceptibility to destruction, incapacitation, or exploitation by a terrorist attack. A couple of things we've seen in the past that might not be the best things to put in this area would be discussions of nonviolent criminal activity that might be occurring in your area. That's not really what this grant is for. We've seen discussions of graffiti or drug dealing in the neighborhood, and that's not necessarily something that's really going to touch on the vulnerability to a terrorist attack. If you're going to mention that, you need to make some kind of connection for us so we can understand why you believe that's relevant to terrorism.
Things that you might consider mentioning are whether you have had an unsecured perimeter, whether you are unable to secure doors of your facility, or your proximity to high traffic areas which could make you vulnerable to vehicular attack, or whether you have open access to your entrances or stairwells or elevators. Again, these are the types of things that you could mention in this section, vulnerabilities. For the next section, consequence, we will also be looking at how well did you address negative effects on your organization's assets, systems, or networks if damaged or disrupted by terrorist attacks. Again, this is worth 4 points. Here we're looking for the disruption of services that your facility provides, the disruption of schools, if you happen to be a school. If your facility is a symbolic structure, what might be the psychological effects, even more widespread than your facility if attacked? Clearly, things along this line, or including mass casualties, should be mentioned in terms of potential consequences. Each box within risk is worth 4 points, for a total of 12 out of 40 points for this part of the application.
So the risk section that we just covered is the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequence. And now we move into the next section for the target hardening activity. This is all about what you intend to do with the nonprofit security grants if you are a successful applicant, how you intend to use the funds to mitigate those threats, those vulnerabilities, or those consequences. You don't need to discuss again in any great detail what your perception of threat is in this section. You've already done that in the previous section. Now you just tell us what you plan to do about it. This is really what you intend to do and purchase with the funds if you receive the grant. Please explain here in the narrative section, which is the first box, what you're going to do. If you're intending on putting in or enhancing fencing around your property, if it's installing exterior lighting, describe what type of security lighting you're putting in. If it's improving doors or windows, what security features are you putting in? This is where you would describe in as great detail as you can. Also, please be sure to align your proposed costs to the allowable costs that are in the grant guidance. That's in FEMA's Notice of Funding Opportunity, as well as the FEMA Preparedness Grants Appendix C that it discusses allowable costs for the nonprofit grant in greater detail. Those are available on the HCEMA website. The allowable costs with a nonprofit security grant are focused on enhancing security at your facility to prevent against acts of terrorism. Equipment is an allowable cost. Training for security personnel on security-related training programs is an allowable cost. Security-related planning and security-related exercise are also allowable costs. Finally, contracted security personnel is an allowable cost. It is allowable to pay for contracted security personnel to protect your facility. However, it is not allowable to hire security personnel. If you are going to include contracted security personnel in your application, please be clear in this narrative section about that cost and how it's going to what it's going to consist of and how it will protect your facility. When it comes to equipment, as it's written in the investment justification template, you can see that they call out specific types of equipment as being allowable equipment categories. FEMA's Authorized Equipment List, or AEL, breaks equipment down to many sections. Section 14, Physical Security Enhancement Equipment, and Section 15, Inspection and Screening Systems. Those are the two allowable types of equipment for the nonprofit security grant. There are some subcategories underneath 14 and 15. A redacted version of the authorized equipment list that only includes the allowable costs for nonprofit grants is on the HCEMA website for your reference. In AEL section 14 and 15, if you are going to identify equipment from those categories in the listing of purchases, you would want to list the AEL number for those articles of equipment that you intend to purchase in the table below. One other note of caution on the authorized equipment list: you'd probably want to make sure that you do not include purchases of any equipment that appear in other sections of the AEL that are not 14 and 15. That would be a clear indication that those costs would not be allowable.
As a reminder of the 40 points possible on your application, this section has 2 points of 14 points regarding how well your project mitigates risk or identified vulnerabilities, another 4 points. Regarding how well the project focuses on prevention or protection against those risks from terrorist attacks, 3 points. If your project is allowable, another 4 points. If your project is feasible, we're asking you to not only include what your project consists of as part of a narrative, but also as part of the grid. Meaning, if you're going to select surveillance equipment or access control equipment, please remember to fill out the type of equipment within the grid, and please select the proper AEL code. For non-equipment purchases such as planning, training, exercise, and contracted security personnel, leave the AEL field blank, but make sure to list the item in the grid.
Please ensure that you use this section to list all of the items of cost that will make up your entire application. If you're applying for $100,000, you would enter items in this list that add up to $100,000.
In the next section, milestones, we're looking for your completion of the steps necessary to accomplish your project. Commonly, to receive 4 points, we'll see steps such as 1, selection of a vendor, a milestone regarding the purchase of equipment, another step regarding the installation of equipment, and another step, the training on equipment. We want to get a sense from you step by step of what's necessary to complete your project, and if it is well described, the maximum points available are 4 points.
So the milestones should be clear, and they should be detailed enough that we understand what the milestone consists of, and they should also provide a logical sequence from start to finish of your project. You should account for the fact that we won't issue these awards until probably the very beginning of October. You wouldn't want to have milestones starting before then. Also, the first thing that all successful applicants will have to do is obtain FEMA's environmental and historic preservation approval. Review and completion can take several weeks to several months. Again, you should account for needing environmental and historic preservation review before you start indicating other milestones for actual project initiation. Try to make start and completion dates realistic and have a sequence of events which make sense during the entire 2 to 3 year period of performance from September 1st, 2020 to August 31st, 2023.
In the next section, project management, this is worth 3 points. We're looking to see how well you justify the effectiveness of your proposed management team, your roles, responsibility, and governance. We want to see how the person named in terms of their experience, how that person is best able to comply with the terms of the grant completion of grant documents. Things to be considered are the completion of project management plans or quarterly status reports, as well as the submission of financial reimbursements. Also describe how the project will be managed, including any likely challenges and how you may mitigate these challenges, and any partnerships or coordination with other stakeholders, again for a maximum possible of 3 points out of 40.
Section 7 is the impact. This is basically the so what moment in the application. You've already described your risks, your threats, your vulnerabilities, and the consequences of an attack on your facility. You've already described the project that you intend to accomplish, and here's the place where you get to wrap it all up and explain how completing the project will improve your security status. This is basically the output of the project. If, for instance, you said your biggest threats were open access to vehicles that may ram or vehicle-borne explosive devices can be delivered to your facility, and then in your project target hardening section, you describe bollards and barricades preventing vehicle access to the front of the building, this would be where you'd explain, here's why that's important, here's why this project makes us safer. This is really the capstone. We wrap it all up and explain the impact of this project, if successfully completed, and how it would improve your security.
Even more specifically, regarding a measurable outcome for bollards to protect against vehicular attack, you might just indicate clearly that no unauthorized vehicles were able to enter your property or be within the space of your facility without permission or authority.
You'll also see that this section has 2 questions. The first one is the measurable outputs and outcomes. Then the second question is, how does this project and its outputs support FEMA's national preparedness goal and core capabilities? These are terminology that FEMA uses to explain how it views the universe of Homeland Security. We're displaying on the screen where you can find the national preparedness goal if you wish to look it up yourself, but also we're suggesting those core capabilities within the national preparedness goal that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program almost certainly will be addressing. There are very few projects that would be considered that would not support one of these 4 core capabilities. In this second section, just choose one or more of these 4 core capabilities: access control and identity verification, cybersecurity, physical protective measures, or screening, search, and detection. Here I would suggest using those exact names that we put there. Those are the names of the core capabilities, and then in writing, explain how your project supports that core capability. This is an easy couple of points to get in this section if you address that question head on. As we've instructed, if you skip this section, it wouldn't be possible to get full points because your responses would not be complete.
In the final section, in your funding history, you must indicate whether you've received funding in the past, yes or no. There's a drop-down menu. If you've received funding in the past, you're going to be asked to provide the years of that funding and the funding amount for each grant that you've received, as well as the investment type. Please note that this year there's a 5-point bonus available to those organizations that have never received a nonprofit security grant. This is something to keep in mind regarding scoring for 2020. In the very last section of the investment justification, applicant contact information must be completed for the person who ends up submitting the application on behalf of your organization. Just indicate their name and email address or phone number and check the box to certify that that person is authorized to submit the application on behalf of the nonprofit entity. If you have any questions, please email us, or that information will be used to email you. Please keep in mind you can submit multiple investment justifications for every facility or location that you occupy. For multiple sites, you may submit multiple applications. However, the total for multiple sites cannot exceed the combined amount of $100,000. But again, it must be a location that you occupy. We also hope to make available questions that have been asked in previous webinars, which might be forthcoming with information that will be useful to you in your completion of this year's grant application.
To submit your application, please email the applications, the investment justification, the mission statement, and the risk and vulnerability assessment to sembry.ross@dc.gov and ncr.saa@dc.gov. Instructions are also available on the HCMA website. Good luck to all applicants, and we look forward to receiving your applications.
Thank you.